There we go. And welcome back, everybody. Welcome back, Dev Days Europe 2022, to the brilliant Teams track. And it's bittersweet that I have to say I have my last speaker of the day with me now, Molood, Ceccarelli.
You got it wrong again.
I got it right. I knew I was going to get it wrong as soon as we went live. I've got it right so many times. I've got to get it wrong when I'm on camera. I apologize.
That's quite all right.
Molood is CEO, remote work expert, agile coach at Remote Forever, and she's going to be talking to us today about remote leadership and asynchronous management. And I don't want to take any more of your time, so Molood, please take it away.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for choosing, out of all the sessions going on, to be in my session. I'm going to share my slides and get started. So this is for visual aids. If you don't want to look at the slides, that's totally fine. You can just concentrate on what I have to tell you. So as Stacy just said, we're going to talk about remote leadership and asynchronous leadership. But let me, before that, tell you who I am and why you should even be listening to me. I started a company called Remote Forever in 2015 with an online conference that was the first of its kind. My idea with that conference was to challenge the world of Agile that was assuming that we needed co-location in order to have agility. And don't even get me started on DevOps and the state it was in back then. I wanted to show people that you don't necessarily need to be co-located to create agility and collaboration. With that, I've come a really long way. Now I'm the CEO of this company and I run a yearly conference on my company. And we also have remote work consulting for different organizations that are trying to transform to agile and remote. And as you all know, in the last couple of years, the whole world has changed because we suddenly became remote. Some companies suddenly realized, oh, this might actually be the trend of work going forward. I've also had the luck and honor to be selected as one of the top 10 people as in remote work shortlist for remote innovation. I won't bore you with my credentials any more than that. But if you do contact me on social media, I always answer everybody and I answer myself. So let's dive in. Let me ask you a question. And if you haven't found a chat box, please find a chat box and let me see your responses. And this way you can also see your responses to each other. So the first question I want to ask you is this. Where do you go to get real work done? And I'm talking about work that requires thinking, work that needs you to be productive. When you really, really want to create something that somebody else needs to consume. Go into chat box and let me know. So some of the answers that I usually get are I go to the cafe or I go to the office, but before everybody comes in. I lock myself in a conference room in an office. Or I go to my attic. I go to a library. So where do you guys go? Just type it in the chat so we can see it. And this way I also don't think that I'm talking to the void. I actually know that you guys are there. Anybody? I don't see any answers in the chat. Do you guys know how to find the chat? On the top right corner, you see the chat button. Okay, looks like, oh, we have one answer. Thank you. You go to the kitchen to get real work done. I wish that other people would answer too. I have a lot more questions for you. So if you do get engaged in the chat, that would make this conversation a lot easier to flow. All right, so we have Liho who says he goes to the office and has headphones all the way up so nobody distracts him. Silent room. So the message that I'm trying to communicate here is that nobody says, I go to the office during work hours and I sit in this open space area where everybody is making noise and that's where I do my best work. No one says that. And yet, companies are spending millions of dollars every year on real estate to create these beautiful spaces for everybody to go there and work from, right? This is insane when you think about it. But when we look at the state of Agile, this number that you see here, 97%. This is from 2021 in the early months. I'm not quite sure if it was from January or February, but it's around that time where this survey, A State of Agile, showed that about 97% of companies claim that they're using some sort of agile practices in their company. When I think about it, this is crazy because 2 years ago, this number was around 60%, and now 97%. That's like every company in the world practically at least has heard of Agile now. Agile is no longer this foreign entity that nobody has a clue what it is. And when it comes to the remote work state, there's also a lot of reports done on the state of remote work. But let me just walk you through the pandemic and what happened. In the beginning, just a few months into the pandemic, Gartner did a survey that showed that about 3 out of every 4 CFO had found this idea of remote working so amazing that they want those temporary remote positions as permanently remote. Later on in July, they did another survey and the number was up. It was around 82% of people who wanted to keep these remote positions. Later on, the number went up. It was up to 90%. And then they made a prediction. They said by the end of 2021, which is a few months ago, they said by the end of 2021, more than half of the knowledge workers in the world will be remote forever. And suddenly, the brand that I had created, Remote Forever, meant something completely different. It meant keeping a job remote. But my idea, as I explained to you, was a little different. The thing is, we are now in the beginning of 2022, and we have far exceeded this number. By the adoption of remote work by prominent companies like Facebook, Twitter, Quora, and many other airlines or telecommunication companies, even though some major companies like Google are calling people back to the office or Apple is calling people back to the office, the global trend is still going to be towards working remotely more and more, even if we're going to have office as an element of that. So, remote work is no longer the future of work. It really has become the reality of work. And I probably don't need to walk you through the benefits of remote work. There's a lot of benefits in terms of cost, productivity, health, that you can take care of your own health. You can hire a native speaker. So, for the business, it has a lot of benefits, but it has also a lot of benefits for the workers. That's also why a lot of employees are choosing to work remotely. But now let me bring it back to you. Do you work remotely or do you work from home? Because there is a difference. And let me clarify what I mean by that. You see, remote work gives you freedom. Remote work, the way it was meant, it was created to bring the idea of freedom to the people. But when the pandemic hit and people were forced to work from home, that idea of being forced all of a sudden, having no choice to choose where you're most productive, like all those locations that you typed in the chat, you lost that choice. And we called that remote work, which is the exact opposite of it. So, work from home during the pandemic literally took that freedom away. But if we accept that remote work is no longer the future, but it is the reality, how can we really interpret it? And what does it mean when it comes to us as leaders? Well, there are leadership qualities that we all have. I am guilty of it, and I'm pretty sure that you are too. If you're trying to resist it, open your mind and try to identify these practices, these behaviors in yourselves. There are only 3 of them, and I'm really generalizing to make it as simple as possible. We can go deeper into like specific behaviors, but I don't want to do that in this short presentation here. The first leadership quality that we all need to unlearn is what I call seagull leadership. Who here has heard of that? Some people have. Seagull leadership is a leader that comes in, checks what people are doing, opines about it, gives their opinion, and leaves. That's it. They never have time for you, but they always have an appetite to know what you're doing or literally stop you in the middle of the flow of your productivity. Like, who was it who said, I have my headphones on? Seagull leaders are the ones who come there and tap you on the shoulder so you lift one of your headset, one of your earphones off in order to attend to that person. And we all do this one way or another, and so much more so when we're remote and we have access to tools like chat tools and such. The next one is the most familiar one. It's military leadership. It's command and control. It's when a leader makes a decision, informs the people of that decision, people carry out the decision, the leader comes in, gathers a report, makes a new decision, informs the people, and the cycle goes on and on and on. The idea is that there is no place for bottom up participation in decision making. There's only reporting going up. There is usually decisions coming from above. And this can be very useful in certain situations, like the military, but in creative environments, it can really get frustrating for people. And in remote organizations, especially those who were suddenly remote, this style of leadership emerged even in leaders that did not identify as command and control leaders before that, because they didn't see people. They just resorted to this style of leadership. The third one that we have to get rid of or unlearn is a spotlight leadership. It's almost like what I'm doing here. I'm talking at you, not with you. And I'm really trying to unlearn this, which is why I have designed some questions in this presentation to actually get your ideas heard as well. But spotlight speaking is different from spotlight leadership. There are leaders who always speak at people, even though the opinions of the bottom up gets heard. The decision maker, the final decision maker, is usually the leader. Even if the people at the bottom line are doing the work, the leader gets the credit and who gets the recognition from it. And we don't want any of these three leaderships. But what are the leadership qualities that we do want in a remote organization? First one is communication. Communication is an interesting one, and to get the message across, and I've simplified everything so much, but to get it across, I need you to answer this question for me. Think about some of the tools that you use in your organization in order to communicate with each other. Some of the answers I usually get are go to the chat and type it as I'm talking to you on this. So some people say Slack, some say Microsoft Teams, some say email, some say phone. Some people go beyond and say, oh, we also use Jira for communication, or we use Confluence for communication. I want you to really think about what are some of the tools that you use for communication in your organization. All right. So now I understand what is going on. So the speed of chat is a little delayed. That's why I don't see your responses right away. So we have Slack, we have Mail, we have Zoom. Excellent. So think about how you use these tools to exchange information. And now let me know which of the following scenarios resonates with you the most. Number one, most of the information that I need to do my job is stored in chat. We have things, and that's where the majority of the information is getting exchanged. Information is scattered in multiple tools. And number four, I know the information I need is there, but I usually can't find it. It's like I have to go to the chat and ask people, hey guys, where is the document for this functionality in the code that I need? So which of these scenarios resonates with you? 1, 2, 3, 4, or multiple of them? We have a 3, we have a 3, we have a 2, and I'm pretty sure some of you have more than one of these. So to make it really clear for you, when you are in a remote leadership position, one of the main, actually the very first and the most important skill that you need to learn is to understand how to analyze the information that you need to exchange, because communication is literally exchange of information. To analyze the information and choose which style of communication to use for it. There are two styles of communication, synchronous and asynchronous. Now, don't get me wrong, most of us who were working in offices before the pandemic and had very little experience with remote working, when the pandemic hit and we were forced to work remotely, we resorted to synchronous working. That means we booked meetings with our colleagues in order not to lose touch. We introduced a new chat tool and created more channels in it in order not to lose touch. We tried to expand the surface of communication so that we had as much synchronicity as possible. But really, really good remote organizations communicate asynchronously by default. So, as a remote leader, as I said, the most fundamental skill is for you to learn this. But is synchronous really bad? No, it's not bad at all. It's actually necessary. It's necessary for decision making. It's amazing for resolving conflicts, for quick synchronizations, for collaborative problem solving, for socializing, celebrating, coaching. So, what does it really mean when I say good remote teams communicate asynchronously by default? What do they actually do? What do they talk about? Asynchronous communication is amazing and necessary for sharing of information of any kind. That includes presenting data and findings, and also for gathering of data. Now, if you look at the right and left side of these two columns, you see that in order to do the things on the left, you can actually do the things on the right. That means you need to gather data, then go to the decision making session. You need to gather data, then go to the collaborative problem solving. What this gives to people is that it allows every individual to process information at the time they are most productive, in a location they are most productive. In the beginning, culture and the habit, it slows things down. But as this becomes part of the culture of the team and the organization, the speed intensely goes up and the productivity rise is very visible. Pillar number 2 in remote leadership is transparency. Now, before you yawn and you go away, let me tell you that this is not what you think. When we think about transparency, a lot of people think that transparency is one way. But I want to make it clear again with a question. I want you to think about a specific piece of information that you need from a person in your organization and tell me where that information is right now. All the answers I usually get are, oh, it's in Slack, or it's in Microsoft Teams. Oh, I know exactly which file it is in SharePoint or in Confluence, or it's in GitLab, or it's somewhere in the code. I know exactly where it is. And someone dares and says, oh, I know who has this information. It's actually in their head. Now think about a specific piece of information and tell me, where is that information? Stacy, amazing answer. Thank you. It's either in the wiki or it's in their head. But we always know who to ask, right? Or we can find our way to that person. This is a symptom of office in-person culture because offices are built on relationships, personal relationships. You know John, and John knows Stacy, and Stacy knows Caddy, and Caddy has the answer. So you can always find your way to Caddy. But what really matters here is that transparency is not exactly about one way, about knowing where information is. And to give you a really clear idea of that, first the question, think about somebody in the organization who needs some information from you and tell me where that information is right now. If you're very honest, you're going to say it's either in my head or I've put it somewhere in the tool, but I sort of expect people to find their way to it without needing to ask me. All right. You see, transparency in a remote organization is slightly different than what we assume transparency is. Transparency enables asynchronous communication, that is, making information available to everyone at the time they need it. So when that person needs that information from you, even though it is stored in a document, they need to know where it is and they need to know exactly how to find it without needing you to be online to tell them exactly where it is. Which is why I define transparency in these two circles that I put for you. So it's both understanding where information is and understanding how information flows in the organization. So we need both transparency over information and over processes. But what does that really look like? Like if we document all of the information and all of the processes, that would be crazy. We would be in documentation hell. But let me tell you this. You see, asynchronous management is the continuous act of creating transparency in all layers of management and decision making. So how do we avoid this documentation? How if we document everything? The key to that is simple. It's simplify. Agile defines simplicity as the art of maximizing the amount of work not done. You might be familiar with this, especially those of you who have worked as product owners or project managers, or those of you who are really hands-on with DevOps technicalities or technical development side of it. You know what not to do in order to deliver value fast and frequently, right? So simplicity in a remote organization, the way I define it is the art of maximizing the number of tools not used. In other words, that means minimizing the number of tools that we use. Now, when I told you what tool do you use for communication, how many of you thought about 3 or more? Probably most of you. We use one tool for documentation, another one for video meetings, another one for chatting, and many more next to that. So what if we could choose only one of these tools and put all of our conversations in it? Wouldn't that be magical? If that tool was so simple and the processes over it were so simple that everybody at the time they needed information knew exactly where to go, where to look, and how to access that information, wouldn't that be amazing? Well, I get it. I know that you're thinking, okay, Molood, shut up now. This is too much. This is impossible. We can't do that. We don't have the power. We have needs for all of these tools. I get that. What I'm trying to tell you here, however, is a slightly different than that. We have gotten into the habit of acquiring tools that do very, very, very similar things. Here's a story. I was supposed to have a meeting with a manager at a client, and this manager had sent me a meeting invitation. They are using Google Calendar, and Google Calendar had attached a Google Meet to that Google Calendar, but the person was waiting for me in Zoom. There was no Zoom link to it. It was just assumed that I should know that this company, although they use Google Calendar, they don't use Google Meet, they use Zoom. And they also had Microsoft Teams as a chat tool. Imagine the chaos. So, what I'm trying to tell you here is when you're thinking about simplicity in order to create transparency, in order to make asynchronous conversation communication your default, list all the tools that you have and don't censor yourself. If you use both Slack and Signal, write the name of both of them down. And then eventually group the tools that do the same thing together. Like chat tools are together, video conferencing tools are together, code review tools are together, and choose one. If you're at a C suite, you have the authority, you have the power to influence and create policies in the organization so people and teams do not just go out and acquire a new tool that we already have a tool for. Stick to what you have and try to improve it, try to make it really, really well. These are like really simple, right? But they're very hard to implement. And it takes courage to go into a team and say, guys, let's just do this. Let's just stick to one video conferencing tool. Let's just stick to one chat tool. Let's just stick to one code review tool, one project management tool. Let's stop this documentation hell, which is bringing us back to having meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. Pillar number 3, diversity and inclusion. And once again, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking about diversity of ethnicity and sexual orientation and all that. And this is not what I'm talking about. I want to bring you to the idea of diversity and inclusion in a remote team. As a remote leader that you are, what do you need to think about beyond ethnicity and sexual orientation and all the stuff that we usually hear about? One of the things that is less thought about is technology and equipment. With a global workforce, not everyone has the same access to high bandwidth internet or the same operating system or network. Especially if you work as contractors, you might use your own computer that comes with its own OS and use a completely different network in order to access the resources of the company that you're providing services for. So if you're a remote leader or if you work as a technical leader in a remote organization, one of the things you really need to think about is how can we create the infrastructure, the technology, the setup to make it possible for people to work from anywhere, any device, any network, and still feel that they are productive. One of the clients that I had once was a telecommunication company. And in the beginning of the pandemic, when everybody had to work from home, they had to use a VPN to use the company resources, and this company did not have enough VPN accesses for people, so there was always a competition about who got to work on a certain day. And I was stunned because this was a telecommunication company. This is crazy to think about this. But because this was sudden, there was no strategy behind it. Now they have solved the problem. Going forward into the future, knowing that remote work is the direction we're taking, having a strategy for how we create the technology and equipment and make it inclusive and accessible is super, super important. The next thing to think about is accessibility. Information and instructions should always be accessible, as well as the tools that we use, obviously. I want you to think about the different levels of ability in people and adjust your designs and your instructions to them accordingly. You see, in a really silly way, I could be standing here and say, everybody stand up. And because I don't see you, I wouldn't see that John is sitting on a wheelchair. And I'm pretty sure that John would feel a little awful that everybody gets to stand up, but he doesn't. And he might not feel seen by the person giving the instruction. So when I am in a leadership position or in a presentation position, I'm thinking about the other person and how they're receiving the information. And this was, I said this is a silly example because the standing up is just a random instruction. I want you to think about what you talk about when you're working together as well, and think about how your message is being perceived. As part of accessibility, there is when we're working remotely, because we're communicating in writing and in images a lot more than before, and we don't usually see each other, especially if you're asynchronous first and we don't have a lot of online meetings. Another disability that comes to mind and is really important is color blindness. There are 1 out of every 12 men in the world that are colorblind, and 1 out of every 200 women who are colorblind. When you think about it, that's a huge number of people. One of your colleagues or yourself might have that disability, but this is not a disability that's often talked about openly in the workspaces. And yet, we see demonstrations showing the color red and green to show the difference. And this is difficult for colorblind people to see this. So, to keep it short, think about the various disabilities that might exist in the workplace, because now we have a global workforce where people with various types of disabilities get to access the same opportunities as those of us who don't have a disability. And this is fabulous. This is amazing, but it falls on us as leaders to provide inclusive environments for them. The next one is privacy, which is also not very much talked about. I have a degree in security, so naturally I think about privacy a lot. People do not have the same threshold of acceptance for what information they share about themselves online. When you're running a company, it might be a policy for everybody to share as much of themselves and their family. Some people might not be okay with that, and we should respect that. So, as a leader, always, always, always ask for permission and consent for recording someone's face, someone's voice, taking pictures of them, especially if you're sharing it on social media or the big bad boys like Facebook and stuff. Sorry that I said that. If any of you is from Facebook, no offense, but this is the idea that you should ask for consent from people before you share their private data elsewhere, and allow people to have control over what information they share on the internet. People's ability to choose how much digital footprint they leave behind should stay with people. And I know it might not be legally accepted, but morally, as leaders, we should thrive. We should strive for this. Pillar number 4, continuous learning. A lot of you are familiar with this. So I'm not going to walk you through the process of a Scrum and teach you how to do continuous learning in that. Instead, I want to focus on what it means to look at yourself and have personal continuous learning as well. As a leader, we need to be really self-aware in order to be able to inspire others. Leaders who are not inspiring usually don't get followed. They don't get their voices heard. Their vision kind of like dies out. People don't want to follow them. So focus on yourself, develop yourself, invest in yourself, and make sure that you have enough self-awareness to empower others. Servant leadership. A servant leader has the commitment to the growth of the people that they serve. Serve your team and strive to make them great before you manage them. In other words, lead people, but manage work. Giving a vision is a fantastic way of motivating people, but as long as you're not committed to people's growth, they will not help you reach that vision. Psychological safety. Creating psychological safety is not something you do once in a lifetime when you take people to an offsite or when you have a team building event. Creating psychological safety should become a routine practice every single day, every time you communicate with people that you're leading. Every time we interact with each other, we need to be observant about the impact of our words and the way that we communicate to others. For example, instead of saying, "Who is responsible for this error?" or writing it in caps, you could say, "Who would like to help out with fixing this error?" Instead of putting the focus on blame, you can put the focus on solution and innovation and bringing people together. Building communities is another one of those. Building communities in an online space needs to be intentional. When people work from an office, communities form by default, even if there is no policy behind it. Some people who sit close together go to lunch together. In a remote environment, however, the community gets stuck to be the team that collaborates together and nothing else, unless the company leadership intentionally creates communities around various interests, around various activities and different things that you can actually do. But this needs to be a role in the company, potentially in the HR department. But even if you don't have an HR department, even all the leaders themselves can create these communities. A really easy community to create is knowledge sharing. Somebody is a senior C++ developer can start a training, like a weekly training, and teach people a little bit of C++ every day. Or somebody who has worked with DevOps for a very long time can tell people that DevOps is not all about tech, that it has a lot more than that, right? But now you might be thinking, okay, this is all nice. There are leadership qualities that I need to get rid of. There are leadership qualities that I need to learn. Asynchronous is number one. We need to get rid of our meetings and get rid of our access tools. But where the heck do I start? I get that. I hear you. Where can I start? First and foremost, as I told you, invest in your own development before you go out and lead people. Remote work skills are not something that you can learn as effectively through trial and error as you could by attending a course. And courses are available, they're not expensive. There are communities you can go to and learn. This conference is, for example, a really great opportunity for that. You're learning a lot about how to connect online to each other. So there is a little bit of practice, but invest in your own skills. Learn time management because that impacts your psychological health a lot. Mental health is really affected when we don't have proper time management. Set clear goals for yourself as well as your team. If you don't use OKRs, you probably don't know what I'm talking about. But if you have OKRs and you have those quarterly goals, also set weekly goals. Check in about those goals, measure your progress, adapt your approach, and respect calendars. When I say respect calendars, this is what I mean. Leaders and developers have different perceptions of what a calendar is. Developers' calendars is divided in two parts: before lunch, after lunch. They need a big chunk of time to really focus and get into the flow, put on their headsets, lock themselves in the conference room or in their kitchen, and just create. Managers' calendars is divided by half-hour increments. Some managers, especially those in sales, have calendars that are divided in half-hour increments because managers usually get their work done in those meetings. And somehow, when the manager is trying to book a developer, they completely ignore the idea that developers should not be interrupted in the middle of their big chunk of time. So, as a good empathetic leader, try to book people that report to you at the beginning or at the end of that big chunk of time, like, right after breakfast or before lunch or right after lunch. You get the idea. Respect calendars. Next one is creating boundaries in terms of time, devices, applications. Different devices for work and private surfing can be amazing if you can afford it. If you can't, at least use different browsers. or browser tabs or virtual desktops. What this does is that psychologically in your brain, it creates a boundary between what is work and what is not work. If you're watching Netflix on the same browser or in the same window as, you have a different tab open that's your work, that's going to confuse you and it can lead to burnout much, much faster than if you actually had two separate windows on two different virtual desktops open. And don't, one of the things that I do, for example, when I want to create these boundaries is using different apps. So with my husband, who is a DevOps engineer and an infrastructure engineer, actually, we use we chat a lot with each other. We use iMessage because we both have iPhones when we want to talk about, food and family and shopping and grocery shopping and things like that. But when we want to talk about serious stuff like our investment portfolio or health related issues, things that really need us to contemplate and have deep discussions, if we are chatting, we're using Signal. This separation of tools just gives us that idea of the separation of the conversation, the separation of the type of the relationship that we have with each other. And that's a private relationship that I just described to you. But you can have the same one with your colleagues. If you're using Slack, have a different channel for talking about your pets or talking about the food that you eat. Don't integrate that into the work because it creates noise and chaos for people. The same idea is with the location. If you sit at the kitchen table and you work there, don't eat there. Eat, finish, move the food, then that desk becomes your work area. It's better if you actually don't combine where you eat and where you work together. Once again, the separation, the boundaries helps our brain to stay healthy, and it reduces the speed of burnout, which is a real problem during the pandemic because we were not trained to work remotely properly. And last but not least is self-care and movement. Digital disconnection in a constantly connected world is super, super important. And it impacts our mental health quite a lot. Now that we're going towards the warmer season in the northern hemisphere, take that opportunity to go out. Those of you in the southern hemisphere, if there is anyone here, enjoy the remaining warm days of the year and do go outside without your phone. Turn off your phones and computers and disconnect every once in a while. Because at the end of the day, we are human beings. In countries where risk of COVID is reduced, meet each other, connect with each other. Because at the end of the day, here's a secret. You don't need HR to tell you who you can socialize with. You can choose the people you want to socialize with yourself. And don't forget to move your body at least a little bit every day. Right now, I'm standing. Do that every once in a while. Don't just stay seated all day long because that's bad for your body, and your body not working well is bad for your mind. If you need to learn more, feel free to contact me on social or go to my website. We're always ready to answer you, and we have a lot of different courses customized for different companies. So reach out, and we'll be happy to give you whatever you need, whatever stage you are at. And if you still are a little confused about, okay, this was a little fluffy towards the end, where the heck do I actually start, Molood? Give me the start button. I'm here to give you the start button, if there was one. Are you ready? Are you ready? Let's get it started. So if there was a start button, it is this. No mandatory meetings. Imagine tomorrow you go to your team and you say, hello, everybody. From today on, no meeting is mandatory. That includes our stand-up, our retrospectives, our sprint plannings, anything. No meeting is mandatory. You only go if you feel like there's value for you in this meeting. Isn't that amazing? And I get it. You're going to be panicking a little bit, especially if you're a leader listening to this. So before you panic, let me tell you this. If you call for a meeting and people don't show up, feel terrible. I get that. Let's park the feeling aside for a little while until I clarify this for you. If people don't show up to the meeting that you called for, what does that tell you? It tells you one of the three things. Either the purpose of the meeting was not clear, the expected outcome was not clear, or people really had no idea what's in it for them. What are they going to get out of it? The acronym that I use is POW, like POW, as in purpose, outcome, what's in it for them. If you manage to clarify the purpose, outcome, and what's in it for them for every single meeting that you want to call, if you actually sit down and contemplate on it, what happens is many times you realize that it's not clear in your own head. But when you start thinking and getting it clear in your head, you realize maybe we don't need a meeting for that. Or maybe there is some level of information gathering that needs to be done before I call for a meeting, and your communication magically gets improved. It becomes more effective. So, next time when you call for a meeting, there is a clear purpose, a clear desired outcome, and a clear communication of what's in it for every single participant going there. And on top of that, they all have already gotten some context about what's going to be discussed in that meeting. So the meetings can be short, productive, and really effective. And this is what I'm going to leave you with. So, this is the magic key. If you dare, go ahead and try it and see the impact. It creates a cascaded impact in the whole organization where almost naturally communication becomes a little more asynchronous, processes become a little more explicit and improved and simplified, and conversations around creating proper remote work strategies and practices get started in the organization. And if you want even more, feel free to go to my website, remoteforever.com/ebook, and get my book. You might get an email that gives you only one chapter, or maybe an email that says, "Hey, you're just signed up. We're going to send you the ebook." Don't worry about that. I will be monitoring all the emails that come in today, and I will send you the ebook myself. And that is it. I have been Molood Ceccarelli. I'm the founder of Remote Forever, and thank you so much for spending time with me and being here.
Well, thank you for that. That was amazing. I have a page full of comments, which I'm not sure we're going to have time to go through. But there's also one thing that I want to bring in from the chat. It's from Chris. During the first lockdown in Belgium, the customer I did work for arranged regular speed dates, where once a month, people who were open to it. Let me see if I can get this right. It's always a problem when you want to monitor and the text is like this big. Where the people who were open to it got to see each other virtually from other departments, from other countries, in groups of 3, and have a chat for 10 minutes. And I love this idea. I've had that in my company, obviously, during COVID. The amount of people where after like 18 months, it was like, I know you, but I've never seen you. And I quite like this idea. It's the thing I really like about it is not making it mandatory. I've seen companies that made it mandatory, and that scared the bejeebers out of me. But I love
Yeah.
the idea of it not being a mandatory thing and just being there as an offer.
That's a really, really great point. Thank you for mentioning that, because a lot of companies have made socializing mandatory, and that really sucks the joy out of it. It is not anymore a pleasant experience, especially in the IT world, where we have a lot of those people who really want to be in the flow in that big chunk of time that I talked about, and they don't want interruption. They don't want the awkwardness of the conversation that comes with it. But when it's optional and it's at a time that's more friendly, people might just take a break and go have a virtual coffee with someone. And that's exactly how it used to be in the offices. That's one of the good things that we had in the office that we have completely distorted when we brought it into the online world. And that's another problem, that we're trying to replicate everything we had in the office into the online world. But we really need to change that thinking and think anew. We need to think innovatively. Think about, what if our world was remote to begin with? How can we include the people who are sitting together in the office rather than the opposite, which is the
Yeah.
default way of thinking?
Yeah, exactly. There's nothing worse than if you're remote and you've got 3 or 4 people in an office, and you might be in a meeting with these people, but you're not in a meeting with those people. You're watching a screen
Yeah.
and they're talking between themselves. And
Yeah, that's what we call remote optional. So what I'm advocating and what we teach our clients who come to us for remote transformation is we create remote first cultures, which is a culture in which remote is the default and office is optional. So every single individual gets the same experience over whatever it is that we're doing together.
I've seen that in other companies that have implemented it. Not worked in one, unfortunately, but I've seen it in other companies that have implemented it. And the difference is night of day to the interaction that you get inside of those meetings too.
Indeed. Indeed.
It's okay. Well, I see that we are pretty much on time. In fact, my count is about to go into the negative. So I want to take this time again to say thank you so much for joining us today. That was an
Thank you
excellent
for having
session, and I
me.
am downloading your ebook as soon as I finish this call because remote work is definitely right. I am never working full time in an office again. That's something I decided over the pandemic. I am never going back full time. But the whole thing about homework and remote work being different, that has really triggered something that I never considered before this. So thank you for that. I'm going to read your book and see what I can get out of it. And yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you for
Thank
your
you so
time.
much for having me. And thanks to everybody who stayed until this very last second. Enjoy the rest of your conference and see you soon.
Yeah. And for me, this is my last session as your host on this track. This is the last session of Brilliant Teams. I want to thank you all for joining us here today. I hope you've had a great time and I hope you've taken away as much as I have from the talks that we've had. I want to give a special shout out to Damon, who's been handling the tech on this team today. And it's been phenomenal. Absolutely 100%. My heart goes out. It has been superb. Thank you. And to Seville for being my contact through the organization and getting all of this going. And of course, all of the unnamed people who, without having them there, these types of things just don't happen. So, a big thank you to all of you who were involved. And on that note, being slightly over time, I'm going to say enjoy the last sessions and bye bye.
Bye. 3, 2, 1. Let's go.
And we're off.